Ask with empathy because it comes off as an interrogation otherwise, and it's not engaging.
When you're talking to a new prospect, how much time are you spending talking at them versus learning about them? If the majority of your time is spent talking instead of listening, you're not building trust with your prospect. Strong listening and questioning skills are the key to digging deeper in those conversations. When your prospect is new to their role, these questions may be some of the first times they're asked to reflect on their experience. Listen in as Dan and I talk about some of the nuances and opportunities that happen when you're meeting with a new decision maker. I'm Kiley Schmitz.
I'm Dan Lappin, and this is Breaking Sales, a nonconformist take on rejecting the sales status quo. Join the Lappin 180 team as we break the tried and died sales tactics and techniques that are failing you and your prospects.
What do you want to talk about today, Dan?
Well, recently, we've been talking a lot about questions and the power of questions, right? Power of learning, how you want to prioritize those. So I've had two clients have some really good experiences that they've shared regarding questions, and they were both in this very unique space. So for our listeners, have you ever showed up at a prospect meeting and you've learned that prospect is new to their position and role? They've just joined the company or they're new to the role within the past year or 6 months. We've always taught that's a great opportunity to ask a little bit about that prospect's immediate perceptions and experiences. And we've had two of our clients recently have really good experiences with this line of question where they learned a lot about their prospect's propensity for change. So let me back up and explain. A prospect's been with their company for less than a year or so. A great question to ask is, hey, can you tell me a little bit about what's one of the biggest surprises that you've seen since you joined the company? It gives you an opportunity to learn about what that prospect has perceived or experienced.
I actually asked that question to a new CEO at one of my clients' firms. And that question got him talking about all of the challenges and the things that he was observing that could potentially need some improvement. I learned so much from that one question.
That's a really good point, Kiley, because I remember it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I'm talking to a prospect, and I'm talking to the new CEO in this instance as well. And they had been there for less than a year, and I got introduced to them. So I asked him, I said, so tell me a little bit about the culture. This was in the first 10 minutes. I go, you're new, you're from the industry. Can you tell me a little about the uniqueness of this culture that you've joined? What are some of the observations that you had? He immediately went into, they resist change. It was almost like, wow. And then he gave me examples. So right away, I knew that he is dealing with a culture that does not enjoy uncertainty. And if he is in there to make change, he's got a long road ahead. So in this instance, these two clients that I work with, they both asked the question. One of them got a really cool response. There was a long pause. She asked, hey, what's the biggest surprise that you've seen since you've been in your role at this firm? And there was a long pause from the prospect, and the prospect literally just said, wow, I've never been asked that. And then there was another long pause, and he was like, I need to think about that one. And then they got into this long discussion. I mean, that one question set that prospect back in a good way that made him stop and start reflecting.
He was totally present in that conversation too.
Totally present in that particular moment. Absolutely. And so for our listeners, you can ask your prospects also, hey, can you give me an example or something that you're most proud of that you've been able to do or implement or influence since you've been there? And just sit back and listen. You will learn so much about how that prospect may view change, how the culture there that they're working within functions. You can learn a lot about how you're going to handle that conversation and future dialogues or interactions with that prospect, just by slowing down and asking a few questions at the beginning regarding any surprises. What are you most proud of? What are some of your immediate observations? What are some of the concerns that you've seen? All of that gives you an indication of how that prospect views the culture, the current role, change, progress, and a lot to do with success in business in general.
And with somebody who's in a brand new role like that, they're probably drinking from a fire hose and haven't even had a chance to take a step back and look at what they've observed and process the information that they've been taking in for that short period of time that they've been in this new role, because they're just trying to acclimate and get their footing.
You know, Kiley, that's true. If you're going to ask these questions, and I would highly recommend these questions, you do want to use empathy. You just don't want to come out of the gate and go, oh, you've been here for a year? What have you learned? That's not engaging. But you hear that that person's been there for a year or less. You would turn to them and say, to your point, Kiley, wow, you've probably been drinking from a fire hose. A lot's been thrown at you. I'm sure you've made a lot of observations. You've been in a lot of meetings. Can you tell me a little bit more? What's some of the surprises? In that instance, now you're engaging them. When you're going to ask them, what are they most proud of? Or have they made decisions or made an impact on the organization? Again, empathy. You just don't turn to the prospect and say, so what are you most proud of? Or what changes have you implemented? There's no engagement. You're probably going to get a surface level answer. With empathy, though, you might turn to that prospect and say, okay, after about a year, what are your top 2 or 3 areas that you feel you want to improve? What are the 2 or 3 areas that you feel change might be needed? And you start digging in a little bit that way.
And I think it's important to note, Dan, that even just the 2 different versions of how you've asked those questions, one feels like an interrogation where your prospect is on defense and is there to defend something that he didn't even know or she didn't even know she was on trial for. And then the other version of this really feels like you're taking an interest. So in these instances, it's creating an environment and also using the proper tone and giving context behind your questions with empathy that makes it less of an interrogation and more of you taking an interest.
Absolutely. Kiley, if you think back on a recent episode, the key to trust out of the gate, and you nailed both, is empathy and listening. So if you haven't listened to number 76, I highly recommend it. It really does help give you a correlation or the relationship between the risk a prospect feels toward change and the trust that you need to help guide them through change. And in this instance here, right, the more empathy that you use in your questions and the more listening that you do, you are increasing that level of trust between you and that prospect.
A low intent mindset may look at this type of scenario where you've got a new decision maker in place. Maybe you couldn't get through to the last decision maker, couldn't get them to buy into some sort of solution that you were proposing. So your low intent mindset would go into this conversation thinking, maybe I can get this guy or this gal to buy into our idea. And if you go into that conversation with your own agenda, versus having empathy and caring about what this individual may be going through in a new role where they're trying to just learn and observe and figure out how to prioritize, they're going to very quickly not trust you. It will not take them very long to figure out that you're there for you instead of there to learn about them.
Yeah, I think to summarize, the key here is prioritize the asking and the listening. When you hear your prospect is in the position and they're new, whether at the company or in the role, take the time to understand their perspective. We've talked about a few of the questions. As you're asking those questions, to Kiley's earlier point, ask with empathy because it comes off as an interrogation otherwise, and it's not engaging. And as that prospect is answering, truly listen. Go a second level or a third level deeper on your questions, but put your energy toward listening. You'll get to the rest of your questions. You'll get to potentially an opportunity to share your IP. But again, prioritize asking, listening, and learning.
Thanks for listening to Breaking Sales. If you want to get engaged with us outside of this podcast, be sure to go to our website, lappin180.com. That's LAPPIN180.com. And there you'll find information on upcoming workshops, different events we're doing throughout the United States. ways to engage with us on social media, as well as a form where you can suggest topics or guests for the podcast. We want to hear from you, so don't be shy. Kiley out. All right. Do we have another episode?